open, transparent trading deals and cutting EU red tape. Europe needs reform.
Hello everybody, welcome to my April video blog from Strasbourg. Well, today we've had our first big meeting post Article 50. So as usual, there's lots of chat around the place about Brexit and what's going to happen. We're still not terribly further forward in knowing exactly, but at least we've seen the intent on both sides. So now everything really is seen through the prism of how does that relate to the Article 50 negotiations. So there's a couple of issues that I've been really dealing with, both around car emissions, and you'll recall that earlier in this Parliament I was rapporteur for air quality, and the reduction of NOx and other pollutants from cars is a real passion of mine. So today we've been voting on an inquiry report, and I'm part of a special inquiry commission looking at what happened with what we call Dieselgate. So that's the Volkswagen problems. And we concluded that there was maladministration both from the Commission and from the Commissioner's office, but also on the part of member states where they were not fulfilling the duties that they are obliged to do under the legislation, and also from indeed the European Parliament itself that was not properly scrutinising what was happening. So that was a very interesting debate, and one of the conclusions was that we should set up surveillance the way they do in the States. That is, that at any time the authorities could take a car off the road, test it, and if it wasn't complying, it was obviously complying on the day it went on the road, but is it still complying? And that would be an issue not for the owner of the car, but for the manufacturer. So in order to do this, there's a proposal to set up a huge new agency. And we'd made some proposals that this was a good idea because the member states and the Commission were not doing the job themselves. And very importantly, coming back to my point about seeing through the prism of Brexit, for us it would be a problem after Brexit to have the Commission in charge, because we will no longer have any leverage on the Commission. But it would be a very good idea for it to be an independent agency that we could decide to buy into, or we could decide not to. The choice would be ours. So from my point of view, I thought the new agency was a good idea. Unfortunately, it didn't get voted on, but we can have another crack at it. We also looked at how we would make new type approval regulations for new cars, and that includes all kinds of tightening up on the regulations to make sure that this diesel issue does not recur. So those were interesting things. Secondly, we looked at palm oil. You'll all be aware that you're eating and using palm oil all the time. If you're using a diesel car, maybe a little bit of the diesel comes from biofuel made from palm oil. If you're using cosmetics, your deodorant, this may include palm oil. And you're probably eating it too, because it's a very useful fat in things like, oh, dare I mention, Nutella, something like that. So palm oil is used in huge quantities here in Europe, but of course there's a cost. And that is that it does lead to deforestation, particularly in rainforest areas such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and increasingly in Africa and South America too. So we want to decrease our footprint environmentally, so we need to have some pretty strong rules on sustainability. And today we voted to have one single sustainability standard. Now that might sound not too radical to you, but frankly it's a huge leap forward. That means that everybody using palm oil that comes into the EU must meet a set criteria. And this means that we will be able to tell you, the consumer, with absolute clarity that the palm oil that's being used is not harming the environment. I think that's a huge step forward. And for those of you who are into your wildlife, and I know many of you are from my post bag, think about those rainforests where animals like the orangutan are struggling to maintain their habitat. I think it's really important that we in Europe do our bit to make sure that we're not creating even more problems for them. But let's not be unrealistic. We know we need the palm oil, but we can do it in a sustainable way. So I'm delighted that we in the British Conservatives voted for that this week, and that now won't go into place straight away. Again, with the Brexit prism, those of you wondering, oh, this European legislation won't apply to us, I think it will, because it will create a standard which frankly will just be adopted worldwide. Within a few years, I expect to see it as a worldwide sustainability standard, because it tends to be that where Europe leads, others follow, particularly the States and China. So I think that's a bit of good news to end on this week. Thank you very much for listening, and see you again in May.